Recording in progress. Dinner is served, folks. Dinner is is served. Okay.
Good evening, colleagues. Good evening. Can I have your attention, please? Can we settle down, please? Thank you. So my name is Nithya Chetty. I've come in from South Africa. Beverly was sure that I had to say a few things about myself. So I'm currently the Dean of the Faculty of Science at the University of Witwatersrand. Short is WITS, not WITS, although we try to be witty as best as we can. WITS is what it is. We're 100 years this year, it turns out. I'm also professor of physics at the School of Physics, and currently I serve as vice president of IUPAP. So Bev, I hope you're happy that I've introduced myself in that way. But really the real star this evening's show, of course, is Richard Martin. I was Richard's PhD student too many years ago, 35 years ago, it turns out. I was Richard's first PhD student at the University of Illinois. And today I want to share with you some of the journey that both Richard and I traversed over these past 35 years. And to be fair, this is not going to be a talk on or critical discourse on Richard's academic contributions to the field of electronic structure computations over these great many years. Firstly, I'm certainly not qualified to give such a critique. And secondly, I would certainly need a lot more time to do that. Instead, it is my intention to talk about Richard, the humanist, the scientist. Really, it's Richard's contributions to the service of society, to humankind, not just here in the United States, but particularly in Africa and increasingly now with impact beyond across the entire world. So I've often seen Richard as an important inspiration in my life, but certainly has touched the lives of great many folk in the field of science. Many of you, of course, know of Richard's work dating back to the early 70s, and only yesterday we heard reference to Richard's work on piezoelectricity of 1972. I think Richard's first paper was published around 1968. So many of you, of course, are very familiar with that his lifelong contributions. But really, my keenness is to share with you the work that we've done over the years, particularly in the context of Africa. But just to set the context, you know that Richard has pioneered the field of computational electronic structure computations for the better part of half a century. He did his PhD in 1969 at the University of Chicago. And importantly, he had several appointments starting off at Bell Labs. And eventually in 1987 is when Richard arrived at the University of Illinois. I just arrived a couple of years before on a Fulbright fellowship to the US, and I completed my master's degree in the first couple of years. So in 87 is when I first met with Richard. That was 35 years ago. Of course, you know of the excellent two textbooks that Richard has written. The first one as a sole author. And these books are really classical textbooks, real classics that are set to be enduring texts for the field that we cherish for many decades to come. And thank you, Richard, for putting in such a magnificent effort in writing those books. Richard, of course, has received many awards along the way. But as I've indicated, it's not my intention to really talk about Richard's academic accomplishments over the years. It is my hope that at some stage this year that the academics closest to Richard's work will come together, and certainly from South Africa, I'm very keen to play my part to host a symposium in honor of Richard's work, and I hope that we can make that a reality. So instead, then, I want to start off with this following quote. Just in a recent interaction with Richard, whilst I was in South Africa, and we were talking about this evening's function in honor of his 80th year, Richard said to me something that really touched me greatly. And he said, "We have made something that has changed the way research is done in many fields of science and technology." Now, let me say that I don't believe that this is an exaggeration at all. And I want to share with you why I think that this is really a very fair reflection of the work that Richard has led over a great many years. So a very quick timeline here. Now, this timeline speaks specifically to my interactions with Richard over the years. So it's not Richard's general timeline, which intersects with many of your lives in many different ways, many significant ways of that, I'm sure, but it's ways in which we have intersected in over the past 35 years. So I've stated that I arrived in '87 to the University of Illinois. It turns out that I was at Illinois when Richard organized the inaugural such workshop, the very first such workshop way back in 1989, I believe it was, Richard, at the Beckman Institute is where that was held. And so it's really marvelous for me to see how far we've come, and the field is so very vibrant and very youthful and very international. And I'm most delighted to see the great number of African scientists that have journeyed over to participate in this program. And thanks, Renata, once again for the invitation to be here. So importantly then, after spending a decade here in the USA and also partly in Europe on a postdoc in Copenhagen and then at the Brookhaven National Lab, I chose to return to South Africa. It was not easy, I've got to say that, but it was just so reassuring every step of the way for me to have Richard encouraging and supporting me in my work in South Africa. In 1997, so 10 years after I met with Richard, both Beverly and Richard visited South Africa, and we had an important school, a density functional summer school, that was really the very beginnings of density functional theory, the way in which I see it in its theory and applications in Africa. But that changed quite rapidly, of course. I visited Richard in 2004. That was just a couple of years before Richard was about to retire. And on one quiet evening, very likely over a glass of wine, Richard and I chatted about life after retirement, and Richard was really keen. He did say that he was very keen to make a meaningful contribution on the African continent, and how it is that we could work with each other to make this a reality. So I really think that was an important conversation that we had, ways in which post Richard's retirement that we could take the work of World Electronic Structure community into Africa. In 2008, we had the forerunner for the African School for Electronic Structure Methods and Applications. That was a very successful school. And at the conclusion of that school, Richard and myself sat together with Sandro Scandolo from the ICTP, and we then began to plan. We began to seriously think about how is it that we can take this activity, which was really quite a superb success for those 2 weeks, how it is that we could take this into the African continent. Then, of course, 2010 to 2020, we had the first decade of ASESMA. That proved to be an incredible success, and I'll say a little bit about that. And currently we're in the second decade. What I mean by that is that we do have a plan for the second decade that has officially been supported by the International Union for Pure and Applied Physics. I've noted here that I became the president of the South African Institute of Physics. Richard was there right by my side at one of the meetings when I was president, and I remembered him giving a speech on the stage and saying how proud he was of me being his former student and having become the president of the oldest physics organization on the continent. I'm currently serving as vice president of the IUPAP, and that's not disconnected. I will touch on this. It is largely because of the success of our endeavors with the ASESMA that I was asked to serve in this capacity within the organization. IUPAP itself turns 100 years old this year. So I should mention that Richard was inducted as a fellow of the South African Institute of Physics last year, and that was because of his significant contributions to physics on the African continent. Now, this is an important picture for many reasons. For one thing, I'm holding a bottle of wine, so you could see who was the real party goer in Richard's group, but seriously, well, I'm looking pretty unkempt because, as I recall, it was the time that I was writing my PhD thesis, just around 1990. It was not an altogether easy experience, Richard. But what we have is Richard's group at that time. And you certainly get the impression that this was a very international group. And this is one thing that I do remember very clearly and very, very fondly, is the extent to which Richard Martin and Beverly too. Beverly was always within earshot of Richard, lending support and certainly a part of the physics group that Richard had at the University of Illinois. The thing that struck me was the extent to which Richard was able to bring in scientists from many different backgrounds and working together. And that was an enduring image and an idea that I had for the rest of my life, because you've got to keep in mind that I grew up in South Africa during the very height of apartheid. It was not an easy experience. For instance, I lived in a totally segregated neighborhood by law, and the university that I went to required that I get government permission to attend on an annual basis because it was a whites-only university. So this was the first experience really that I had of working in a multinational, multicultural, multiracial environment. And that has been an experience that has been with me for the rest of my life. This was just soon after I graduated, and Beverly organized a nice cake for me out in a park in Urbana, Illinois. And you could see at the bottom left-hand corner the Danish flag that was imprinted on the cake. That was because I was heading over to Copenhagen for my postdoc. Richard smiling wonderfully here. I think he's pretty glad that I eventually got done with my PhD. So I certainly had a good crop of hair then, didn't I? So 1987 was an important year. It was 10 years after I met with Richard, and I had returned to South Africa before then. So this was when Richard, Beverly, and I went out to the Kruger National Park on a safari, and we had a wonderful, it was not 1987, it was 1997, isn't it? I have that wrong. That was 1997. Yeah, so it was 10 years afterwards that Richard had come to Africa for the first time. In fact, both Richard and Beverly spent some time out in Malawi and in Zambia digging water wells for local communities there, which was really quite wonderful that they would do that. And soon after that, they arrived in South Africa. We did go on a very exciting safari tour to the Kruger National Park. Now, I'm just reminded that when I said to my wife, Ineshri, who was back in South Africa, that I'm giving the banquet talk, she said, please make sure that you don't give yet another boring physics lecture. So she made sure that I slip in the following images, and this is just especially for Beverly. So we tend to have these heavy traffic jams occasionally in South Africa. So we did have this wonderful trip into the Kruger National Park, and this is an open invitation for each of you to participate in the program that we've set up, the ASESMA program, because Africa has just so much to offer, and especially now a growing intellectual cohort in the areas of electronic structured computations. This was the 1997 summer school that was held just outside Cape Town. You see Richard always very closely connected with me in this picture. Once again, I certainly had a lot more hair then. But there are other important individuals that participated in this meeting. We have Walter Cohen here. And I was so delighted to have spent two full weeks with Walter out in this very nice secluded area on the Atlantic Ocean side of South Africa. And of course, you know Walter's story. He had himself been persecuted in Austria and was able to escape from the wrath of the Nazi invasion over through to Canada and eventually to the United States. And we literally spent 2 weeks together, and I had many occasions chatting with him about his background, and he was of course very fascinated with the transition to democracy in South Africa, and Nelson Mandela had himself just been released from prison just a few years prior to that. So those interactions were very important. But all told, I would say that it was the idea of science as a means to developing people that had begun to emerge very strongly in my engagements with both Richard and certainly during the time with Walter Cohn. That is John Perdue, and I have next to Richard, to the right of Richard, as we see it, is Rainer Dreitzler from Frankfurt University. So I've looked carefully, Richard, at this image, and I couldn't find a single participant that was not from South Africa. So I could be wrong. There might have been one or two students based in South Africa from countries north of South Africa. But at this stage, way back in '97, there weren't any participants actively involved in electronic structure work in the rest of Africa, to the best of my knowledge. Certainly not at the summer school. This is a picture here of Richard and Walter, together with Daniel Jouet, who helped organize the workshop. And this is when we visited a winery out in Cape Town. So the wines are pretty good out there. And that's also another reason why you should try to visit at some stage. So where do we start? This is a good way to start, since I think of Richard as a global leader, a global inspiration for science and for humanity. But there's something terribly wrong about this map. This is a map that you know all too well. It's the way in which the sphere has been projected onto a flat space, and it does distort things in ways that you might not have understood or imagined before. Consider this map. This is a little bit more illuminating. Africa is pretty big. You can fit all of the United States into the continent of Africa, and you'll still have a lot of space to spare. All of China can fit into Africa, and so can, well, okay, you can always put Netherlands just about anywhere, I guess. There's Belgium there too, but we have Spain, France, and Germany bringing up the northern frontier of the African continent. All of India fits into the Horn of Africa. And the United Kingdom, well, we can give the UK Madagascar. They like to be on their own, don't they? So here, here's the thing. The next time you say I'm heading over to Africa, I just want you to think a little bit more carefully about that. Africa is really big. It is enormous. It's inhomogeneous. And this is one of the reasons why I think we do not have a careful enough and nuanced enough understanding of the challenges in the continent. And I would dare suggest that Richard gave this attention, gave this much more detailed attention, gave this a lot of thought about ways in which we can make a meaningful change where others have not succeeded. Africa is a continent with enormous diversity, of course, is dominated by English-speaking countries and French-speaking countries, to a less extent Portuguese-speaking countries, but it was also colonized by Holland, by Germany and Italy. So there are pockets of other European languages that exist on the continent, but the continent itself is inhomogeneous, as I say, with many different cultures, many different languages, indigenous languages, different histories, different economies, different geographies, for sure. And so one should consider this, that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, that one has to think about a more targeted approach in resolving challenges, and of that there are plenty. Obviously, you're fully aware, and I'm not going to dwell much on the real difficulties that we face on the African continent. It's been ravaged by slavery that has impacted not only the African continent, but elsewhere in the world, including here in the United States. Colonialism has been an extension of that period, and of course, in some aspects of some parts of Southern Africa, including present-day South Africa, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, the policies of racial segregation were actively pursued in the form of apartheid. So politicians and social scientists and various others sort of stand on the sidelines and comment on these issues and difficulties and don't necessarily always provide solutions. But physicists are different, isn't it? Physicists really roll up the sleeves and get connected with what the solutions what the solutions should be, and this is where I think we have done and made a big difference with the ways in which we have pursued the assessment program in Africa. So Richard and I have often spoken about this, and I've shared with you many occasions when we have had the opportunity to sit together, often over a glass of wine. I got to say that. And to talk about the challenges that I speak of. But the one thing that we're very clear about, and that African countries, we believe, have a common destiny forged by closer cooperation amongst African countries. I think that is something that we must try to encourage, not necessarily on their own. There is a need for outside support. Nobody's saying that this is not necessary, but with science being at the very center of that agenda. And Richard and I believe in that very strongly. There are lots of opportunities in Africa. There aren't only just challenges. Africa, it turns out, is very young in the truest sense of the word. 60% of the entire continent, it turns out, is under the age of 25 years. It makes it the youngest continent. It's also the oldest continent if you consider that humankind emerged out of Africa. But this is a great opportunity, isn't it? Because the future belongs to our youth, especially in this highly changing technological world that we're living in, and our youth are a lot more understanding of the dismal future that we leave them behind, isn't it? And many are a lot more activist in terms of finding better solutions to our climate and energy challenges that we currently face. So in here, I see a great possibility. I think the greatest gift that we can give our children is the opportunity, not just simply the freedom, but the opportunity to dream that anything is possible. And I think science has a great chance to achieving precisely that. So I've talked thus far for a need for a nuanced and sustained approach. It's not just once off, you kind of fly in and kind of engage and interact and leave, because that has been tried for a great many years, isn't it? And it's just not had sufficient traction. There's got to be this sustained approach. There's got to be a follow-up. There's got to be continual engagement if we really want to achieve what it is that we set out to achieve, which is to grow the scientific capacity with the African continent. I do not think that we should get involved, not necessarily only because somehow the world owes Africa. I don't think that the Africans necessarily want to be seen to be a victim through this. It's been a horribly difficult time the past 400 to 500 years. You know that. But I believe that the rest of the world needs Africa to join the community of scientific nations on equal terms, and for the benefit of all humanity. So we've got to not really see this as something that's nice to do, but something that is very necessary to be done for many reasons, including the fact that many problems facing humanity today are of a global nature. Affect people across the entire planet. You cannot try to resolve issues that we're trying to give attention to by ignoring 1.2 billion people on this planet, and a very large landmass as well, as I indicated. Many impoverished countries in this world face global issues disproportionately. It turns out that whilst much of the carbon consumption has occurred out in the Western world, in terms of climate change, you're going to have a lot more impact out in places like Africa and the Pacific Northwest. So we cannot ignore the impact that this is, the impact that we will face if we do not have a scientifically literate global community. Of course, there's immigration. I mean, we're seeing boatloads of folks simply trying to escape the difficult conditions that they're living in, and how are we going to stem that? Well, there is no easy solution, but we certainly can try to improve the economic well-being in Africa and other such impoverished countries by growing the scientific capacity. So this brings me to the topic of material science, and slowly, of course, I'm trying to get to the importance of and the relevance of electronic structure computations in the context of Africa. Africa, of course, has been long known to have an abundance of raw materials. That's well known. And we need simply to add more value to this, and growing a material science industry is an obvious thing that should be done. It has not been done sufficiently well over the past many decades. I think there were many opportunities of the last 50 years for such industries to have been established. But it was seen to be much more profitable to haul rocks from a mile underground and ship those off to far-flung places in return for highly mechanized goods, and we've got to change that. And that can only happen by having a more established material science research community as well as industry. And that applies to practically all parts of Africa. But what we are quite clear about, that Africa is not short of talent. I think this is what's driven Richard and I by noting very early on that we have many talented, enthusiastic young individuals that really are keen to learn. They just need to be given the opportunity. We need to grow critical mass, and especially not necessarily only in material science, but we believe that this is certainly an important area to start with. Obviously, experimental material science is expensive. You need expensive equipment. Infrastructure is also the maintenance of those facilities, not all that easy. Increasingly now, we are facilitating the mobility of scientists to various other laboratories, including here to the Brookhaven National Lab, where scientists are able to send over the samples and can robotically or remotely engage with the experiments. So that's a reasonably cheap way in which experimental work can continue to develop in Africa. But really, electronic structure computations is a great opportunity for Africa. This was something that we discovered and discussed so many years ago, relatively cheap. You can interact remotely, right? I mean, we didn't need COVID to help us understand that within our endeavor, you can do an awful lot through the internet. Of course, there's a very large community of people all around the world. It's grown considerably since Richard was a student way back then. Today, methods of density functional theory, or more broadly atomistic simulations, electronic structure computations, and so on, impacting not just simply physics, but all the way through to chemistry, material science, engineering, biological sciences now, and certainly with strong prospects for engagements with industry. And interestingly for me, as a student, you can decide to get involved in the educational aspects of electronic structure work just from a pedagogical point of view, which has a lot of relevance in Africa, of course, or take to more fundamental theoretical formulations around the theory, or look specifically at algorithmic issues and the development of codes, which is simply adding to some of the large production codes that we have. But a lot of the focus, of course, is on practical applications. And I expect that many of our students will be working on problems of relevance in the African continent. Now, for many decades, the sort of standard way in which the rest of the world kind of engaged with young students of talent in Africa was to award fellowships. I myself got a Fulbright fellowship, got to the United States, but of course I dared to go back, and not many do. So it's important that such programs continue. The Rhodes Scholarship, of course, is another prestigious scholarship that has its roots in South Africa, it turns out, in the diamond industry. That's how Cecil John Rhodes accumulated his wealth. So we've often had this outflux of intellectual kind of talent into Asia, into Europe, into the United States, and of course that has added to the brain drain. It certainly has, because in many instances, folk have simply remained in the foreign lands and have not come on back to their home countries. Of course, many in the diaspora do continue to contribute. I've just been talking to our colleagues from Ethiopia, and I'm aware of the North American Ethiopian Physical Society, and they're very strongly connected with Ethiopia. So that's one case example where that strong relationship has been of mutual benefit. But the one thing that Richard and I spoke about is that let's try to flip this vector in this way. So rather than just simply only having students go out to foreign locations, let's have expert scientists from around the world come to Africa, because that can be mutually beneficial. Our expert scientists also need to catch a glimpse of the real conditions that our African students and scientists are working under. I think that that's quite an eye opener. And then we've had put in place a system where students, talented students, well, not really students. After a while, we stopped using that term. We felt that the term participants would be better, because some of these are young faculty from various institutions around the African continent, through a very stringent selection process, brought to the same location. And that's how the ideas around assessment were born, that we would basically bring in the talent into a single location and have that location move through various different African countries. And over the past decade and a bit now, the assessment school has gone through various different parts of the continent. This picture was taken the time when I became the president of the South African Institute of Physics. And you can see the evidence is right there. We're sipping on some red wine. And I did bring Richard a bottle of red wine from South Africa, so I didn't bring that up to stage here, but I will hand that over to you in a short while, Richard. Always an excuse for a nice glass of wine. So this was important, because Richard was present with me when I addressed the South African physics community for the first time as president. And that was certainly an important moment in my career back at home. So let's get on very quickly then. I'm mindful of the time. The Forerunner School was held at the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences just outside Cape Town. And you see Richard, and over to his right is Neil Turok, who's a South African-born scientist. He had moved across to the Perimeter Institute in Canada, and through the Canadian government had secured a massive grant to establish the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. Currently, there are about 6 or 7 such institutes spread across the African continent, and they certainly are doing very good work as well. But the ideas around assessment really began to develop with Richard and myself, and of course, Sandra Scondolo. Bringing the ICTP into this discussion was a very important part in the ways in which we consolidated the program. But importantly, we also got the International Union for Pure and Applied Physics to support the program, and for the success of the program, I then got appointed as I've indicated, to serve on the council of the Institute. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But folk like Jim Gubernatis, whom you do know, and Kennedy Reed, both of them Americans. Peter Bosch was formerly from South Africa, but was based at Birmingham, I believe, has since passed away. Those 3 individuals are credited for helping us take this application process through the International Union for Pure and Applied Physics. And so the assessment school then became endorsed at a very high level, and that helped us to leverage funds from many other international sources. I don't think that I have all of the sources included here, but you know the American Physical Society, the US IUPAP Liaison Committee, the Center for High Performance Computing in South Africa. We even at some stage had the Beijing Supercomputing Center sponsor a school. So there've been over the years a great many sponsors, and at some stage, I think when the complete story of assessment is written, I hope that we will include all of the institutions around the world that have supported our efforts. We've now had many schools, many successful schools. 2010 was when the first assessment school took place in Cape Town. It subsequently moved over to Kenya in 2012. Great to see some of our Kenyan colleagues here. Winnie's here from the Kenyan school, many others too. We did attempt to go to West Africa in 2014, and that was a very traumatic year, the year when a number of the girl children were abducted and they were brutalized, of course. That was really horrible. And so we moved that school at short notice back to to Johannesburg. That's the university where I currently am at. So the number of schools last year, the school occurred at Rwanda. That was a virtual school. And next year, I believe it will be back at Rwanda, and hopefully that will be a face-to-face school. So I'm not here to give you a full report on SESMA. I was really felt it important to acknowledge Richard's role in setting up the assessment school and our thinking behind that. That is important. I'd like you to know that through all of these engagements, it was Richard that really inspired us all to think about the ways in which we can make a meaningful impact on the African continent. There are now active research groups in many different parts of Africa. And when I talk about active, I really mean contributing at the highest levels in terms of doctoral student supervision, master's student supervision, but also publishing in very high quality journals. Now, the very recent terrific news has been the award through the Innovation Fund of the American Physical Society of the program that's called the US Africa Initiative in Electronic Structure, and that has brought a number of our African participants chosen very selectively. So they've really demonstrated their success and their interest and expertise in these areas. And they, of course, are going to be partnered with quality scientists across the country. And this really takes the whole ideas around assessment to an entirely new level, and it's created more possibilities for our students in Africa. And now the two-way exchange becomes even more meaningful because our colleagues have a home base back at home and they come to the United States with a specific intent to advance their knowledge and to become more focused on some very particular problems. So the future is very bright. There have been many reports. Richard and I have written a great deal about SESMA, and we've spoken a great deal about that. It was not my intention to give more details about the nuts and bolts of each of the schools. But let me just say that there are many, many people to thank. It was not just simply us who made this work, of course, but we were there at the very beginning. Too many to thank, really. So I've chosen not to list any because I'm sure I'm going to miss a good fraction. But I do want to recognize Sinead here, and she's been here right from the very outset. She was a first-year student. Sinead, here you are. She was a first-year PhD student when she first arrived as a tutor way back in 2010, and you walked this journey with us right from the outset. And there's so many wonderful, wonderful stories of folk from Japan all the way through to the US, of course, participating and contributing. And the consistent message that you get when you talk with folk that come in from the outside and engage with their SESMA communities, that it's just such a pleasure and such a wonderful experience to be involved in something that is so meaningful. And I think that's a wonderful thing to note. We're on a second decadal plan, and who's to say that we should not continue into the 30s as well? Because judging by the contributions at this workshop, I get the distinct sense that firstly, the field is very, very youthful. I mean, I look across and see nothing but folk half my age or a third of my age. That's a good sign. And the level of technical detail and the quest for greater accuracy and the power of computing algorithms, including artificial intelligence, possibly even quantum computing, just assures us that the ideas that Richard pioneered way back in the 70s will continue to be the mainstream of the things that we'll continue to compute for several decades into the future. So the many success stories, many success stories, I just want to share a few with you. So this is a student that did a PhD with me. So I'm very proud of her. She came from Madagascar, and there's a quote. So this there was a brief report in the African Physics newsletter recently, and you can pick up on that. But this quote that's attributed to her in the article is just so incredibly striking, and I think it's reflective of many other stories that you will hear if you dare to sit down with folk in this situation and chat with them, because behind every success story there is another deeper story, one of endurance and one of hardship and one of tremendous challenges. And I'm very sure that if some of us had been faced with similar challenges, we might not have achieved half as much. So she says, Farashiho is the town that she comes from, is a very small, remote town in Madagascar. It is not an area one would normally have high dreams, like obtaining a doctoral degree and having a career in science, in research. The day-to-day life there revolves around rice and potato farming. And people really measure the success on such things. I thought it was kind of a nice quote. But she worked on band gap engineering and molybdenum disulfide. I mentioned this here because one does not necessarily have to work on the biggest of problems in Africa. I think you might not necessarily have the biggest supercomputer accessible to you, but if you focus on a meaningful problem and delve into it with sufficient accuracy and detail, I think good science can certainly be done. It turns out that one of her images from her PhD work was featured on the front cover of the Journal of Condensed Matter, the issue number 32. So she was really very excited about that. She did receive a travel grant by the American Physical Society that got her over to Los Angeles for an APS meeting. Don't quite remember what year that was now, but that was certainly before COVID. She subsequently did a postdoc that was funded by Johnson Matthey, a British pharmaceutical company. She worked in biolayer zeolites, looked at N-type, P-type defects in zeolites, biolayer zeolites, and currently, just very recently now, and primarily due to the networking that has been in place of sharing resources and sharing opportunities, we got to learn of the postdoctoral opening out at the Institute for Molecular Science at the University of Bordeaux. And so she's recently now successfully moved across to Bordeaux. Unfortunately, now she's able to speak her native French. She comes from Madagascar, which was a French colony. And she's, by all accounts, it seems that she's settling there very nicely. So that is one story that I thought I should mention. I cannot speak about all of the stories, and there are great many stories, and I sure hope at some stage folk are going to jot down these stories and record them because they all are very special. I've chosen this article that's come out of Cameroon, and Cameroon's certainly doing very well, I believe. Not only in football, you guys play football pretty well, give South Africa hiding most of the time, but you're going to emerge as a great center for electronic structure computations. Of that, I have no doubt. And this paper by Annie Baer acknowledges, and I just thought I'd highlight the acknowledgement, the use of the Center for High Performance Computing in Cape Town. So ISESMA created this opportunity for a group in Cameroon to access facilities out in Cape Town. But incidentally, they also accessed, it's rather tiny, you might not be able to read this, they were able to access facilities, computing facilities in the West Indies, and almost immediately now there are new interactions and new connections that are created through ISESMA, but that might not have been intended originally, which is quite superb, I thought. This is work that we did at the University of Pretoria. All of my students were ISESMA graduates. So this was on mechanical properties of graphene and boronitrine. We observed that a two-dimensional bulk modulus was not defined. We've only really had a three-dimensional bulk. I'm not sure why nobody really considered this up until now. So basically a two-dimensional pressure would be dE by d minus dE by dA rather than minus dE by dV. So it's really the two-dimensional equivalent of pressure. Force per unit length is units, and so you can define a new material property which we refer to as a layer modulus in much the same way as we have with the bulk modulus. So this provides a unified way to compare the strengths of different two-dimensional systems, and we computed the layer modulus for these two-dimensional systems several years ago now for the very first time, and show that carbon in the graphene structure is actually strongest, which is quite remarkable, isn't it? Because we know the graphite is pretty soft. Carbon in the diamond structure is pretty strong, but this was the first calculation of the two-dimensional bulk modulus. But also comparatively, you could see that boron nitrine is also comparable in strength. We also made other predictions around a proposed negative pressure for transitions from the graphene structure to other structures as well. But finally, just the final, only because Annie Etendele is here, I thought I would advertise some of her work. Also from Cameroon, she's been working very closely with Mark Casida, and Mark has been really stalwart and a real servant to ASESMA over the great many years. And this was Annie's work published out of her PhD. Well done to you, Annie, and I'm delighted to see that you're also now taking your work further. So an African proverb, it's certainly a proverb that you'd find in many other communities as well. A journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, and it's so very apt here. You've got to start somewhere. But and I've just simply added to that, but you've got to take that first step. It does not help to throw up your arms and say, well, these problems are insurmountable, or we cannot do anything much, and let's just turn our backs on it. And I think ASESMA has been an important initial step that will ensure that from generation to generation, we will begin to build scientific capacity in an area that is very relevant to Africa. Doing nothing is not an option. So this is really an open invitation to each and every one of you colleagues to join in this effort. I hope that you will see opportunities. The next school takes place in Kigali next year, and to talk with Sunit. She puts the program together. I hope I'm not putting too much of pressure on you, Sunit, but she would be able to advise on how you can get connected. Now, Richard specifically asked me to comment on my work within the International Union for Pure and Applied Physics. Is this connected with Richard? Yes, in a way, because the success of ASESMA ensured that I was given a call by the president, Kennedy Reed, American, and he said he'd like to have me on his team, and he's really keen on pursuing a developmental agenda for physics on a global scale, of course, and how is it that I can join in on that effort. And so I was appointed responsible for membership and development of the 5 vice presidents on the council. This is certainly very challenging, I've got to say that. So the one accomplishment that I'm most proud of is that I led the incorporation of Ukraine into the IUPAP. So I'd already long concluded that Ukraine was under a lot of pressure, of course, and from its neighbor. And Ukraine, it turns out, was the most scientifically productive nation in terms of physics. That had never been a member of the International Union for Pure and Applied Physics. So it was a natural target, but I'd understood, because of my conversations with Ukrainians, and I had several conversations with the Ukrainian ambassador in Pretoria as well, that there was a clear intention to internationalize and reach out to other international organizations. So it was a great opportunity. So I've got to say that this has really turned out to be something very positive for Ukraine, despite the hardship and the sheer carnage that we're experiencing in that beleaguered country. And we hope for peace, don't we? I worry about the attack on the scientific system and the fleeing of scientists to neighboring countries. So we've been a part of all of those discussions within the International Union. And because I had established contact with the president of the academy, the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences in Kiev, I had been engaging with him during the very height of the war. In fact, in March, I had been talking with him, and he let me know that at times he had to leave a bunkered situation to come out so that he could get his microwave link to get email connection to engage with myself. So we have the General Assembly for the IUPAP coming up in another next month, and I've arranged for the president, Anatoly, it's got a difficult last name, Zagorodny, that he will give an address at the opening session to talk about the state of science in his country and how is it that the rest of how the IUPAP can assist in that way. So I just kind of want to go through this really quickly. There was lots of discussions at the level of the organization about how it is that we should position ourselves with regard to the war, because Russia, of course, is an extremely important scientific partner within the organization, which, did I say, is 100 years old this year as well. So I penned this statement, which was accepted as an official statement of the organization, because some controversies did develop. But I remembered that during the very height of the Cold War, it was IUPAC that ensured scientific engagements across the Cold War that ultimately contributed to that Iron Curtain coming down. Without scientific engagements, I doubt very much that we would have developed the understandings that are very necessary across our different divides. And once again, it comes down to the very principles that I've been speaking about. So this is a statement that once again I feel, because I went headlong into this issue around the war insofar as the IUPAC is concerned. So the two key points here is that what I stated was that over the past 100 years, through all conflicts in this world, the organization has always been able to do two things with a lot of care. One is that it's kept channels of scientific cooperation open, despite all of the differences and disagreements and conflicts, but also at the same time expressed its concerns around any activity that disrupted those scientific engagements, including war. So we issued a number of fairly powerful statements along these lines. At some stage, there were some countries, which I wouldn't mention, that barred Russian scientists from participating in scientific conferences. And so once again, I was quite actively involved in drafting the following statement that really speaks to the following: that if any scientist feels that because of the origin or the nationality are unable to participate in any scientific activity, they may, through special permission, just simply use the affiliation of the IUPAC. So that was also another intervention that I led within the organization. And I think you can see where all of that thinking comes from. Quite remarkably, South Africa was one of only 13 founding members of the IUPAC. So you see South Africa listed at the very end there, but all of the other countries are modern day first world countries, developed countries. So as a South African and currently as Vice President responsible for membership and development, I feel a huge responsibility to taking this conversation way beyond Africa into other parts of the world. So during my term as Vice President, I managed to negotiate the incorporation of Jordan, Egypt, Uruguay, Bulgaria, and Ukraine into the Union. So I'm very proud of that. And currently I'm engaging with the Pacific Island nations and Nepal very actively. In fact, on Tuesday morning, I had a meeting here out of New York at 2:00 local time to connect up with folk out in New Zealand and Australia concerning interventions that we will have out in Fiji and other neighboring island nations. But the ideas that we have are very similar to the ideas that we developed around assessment. That is to figure out what the local needs are. Very likely it will be in the context of education, and we will try to have schools set up where experts from around the world can come to host such schools and to maintain that connection over a sustained period of time. It should not just be something that is once off. So really, to close then, it's clear to me that physics still needs to develop to a high international level, not only in South Africa, but in many other parts of the world. And it's very necessary that we do this. And the organization that has an opportunity to help facilitate this, not to do this on its own. It can only do this through partnerships, as I've mentioned here, through the APS. The APS Global Welcoming Hub is an important new development. ASESMA is certainly a program that contributes to this partnership that I speak of. But through the organization, they are certainly prioritizing the development of physics in various other parts of the world. If we don't do so, just simply having opportunities such as scholarships and postdocs and visiting positions and so on, those could never possibly be taken up if you do not have that capacity in those local areas. So this is something that has certainly caught my attention as well. Just very briefly, the IUPAC has been the lead organization in establishing, in declaring this year, 2022, as the International Year for Basic Sciences for Sustainable Development. It's a long acronym. I'm not sure that I remember it correctly, but these conversations started in the Council of the IUPAC, where a lot of my experience within Africa played an important role in conceptualizing this, the ideas around this international year. So we were, over a period of time, able to bring together quite a large number of other international organizations, such as the International Mathematics Union and the Materials Research Union. And I can see International Union for Pure and Applied Chemistry out there, International Astronomical Union, but the leading union was the RUPAP. That's where we initiated the idea of declaring 2022 to coincide with our centenary, of course, to also declare the International Year of Basic Sciences for Sustainable Development, and I was certainly quite involved in that. But once again, a lot of my experiences and thinking emerged from my work with Richard within the assessment community. So finally, I want to say that really what we need to think about is pursuing excellence in physics. I think if it's not excellent, then you might as well not do it. Wherever it is that we're trying to develop physics, we've got to aim for the highest possible standards, and having those international exchanges helps a great deal to maintain those international standards. We've got to focus on excellence, no compromise on that. And by doing so, this is a very strong basis for development. And that really is the central principle and idea that I close with, the idea that Richard and I spoke about for the last 35 years. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm not sure if anybody, yes. So I'm just going to leave. I don't have a chairperson. I'm also the chairperson, quite clearly. I'm just going to pass the microphone over to whoever wants to speak. So is that Renata? I don't know, but thank you. Fantastic. Thank you, Richard. Happy birthday for August this year. We do have a surprise here. We have all the way from Africa, we have Gugu and Annie who are going to sing a little song for Richard. Come through, please.
Hello, everyone. This song is from Whitney Houston. It expresses exactly what we feel. It expresses exactly what we feel. It's like we were crying in Africa. We were praying. We didn't know that somebody heard our cry, but definitely Richard heard it. Are you ready? My voice is broken tonight, but just because of Richard, I'll do my best to sing. Many nights we've prayed, with no proof anyone could hear. In our heart, a hopeful song we barely understood. Now we are not afraid, although we know there's much to fear. We were moving mountains long before we knew we could. There can be miracles when you believe. Though hope is frail, it's hard to give. Who knows what miracles you can achieve when you believe? Somehow you will. You will when you believe. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Many more years to you. Many more years to you. Many more years, many more years. Many more years to you. Thank you.
So I just have to say something. Is this on? Because I've gotten way too